Good evening. My name is Sharon Sandman. Welcome. We want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. Just to go over the webinar logistics, webinars will be recorded and posted on Native American Producer Success Project, NAPS, on Facebook and YouTube. During the presentation, you may enter your questions in the Q&A box or in the chat box. After the presentation, we will have a Q&A session. At that time, you may also raise your hand to ask your question. Additionally, I would like to share information about our project. The Native American Producer Success Project is a collaborative effort between Developing Innovations in Navajo Education Incorporated, New Mexico Cooperative Extension, and Dene College Land Grant Office. The goal of the NAPS project is to increase the profitability and long-term sustainability of Navajo farmers and ranchers by providing information about improving Navajo farm and ranch operations, increasing Navajo farmer rancher knowledge of and access to available programs and technical assistance provided by the USDA, BIA, Navajo Nation, New Mexico Cooperative Extension, Dene College Land Grant Office, and others. And we are strengthening the organizational capacity of the Navajo Farmer and Rancher Congress to address the current and future needs of Navajo farmers and ranchers. NAPS is funded by USDA's Office of Partnership and Public Engagement. Outreach and assistance for socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers and veteran farmers and ranchers program. Dr. Kevin Lombard is an associate professor of horticulture and superintendent of the New Mexico State University Agriculture Science Center of Farmington, New Mexico, located on sovereign Navajo Nation land. With his collaboration, he conducts specialty horticultural, crop research and grapes and hops and winter malted barley. Crop irrigation consists of center pivot, drip irrigation, and soil set sprinkler. And his collaborators, he also conducts soil quality monitoring associated with August 5th, 2015 Gold King mine spill. He is also interested in urban horticulture and the garden's role in maintaining community health and wellness, especially to prevent diabetes, and collaborates with public health researchers. He helps his wife, also a horticulturist, cultivate on a small, intensively managed vegetable, cut flower, berry, and ornamental garden. He has worked over 30 years professionally in landscaping and grounds maintenance, Peace Corps, estate gardening, and in academia. He is grateful for all the opportunities that have come his way and uses each opportunity to better himself and others. This evening, our presentation will be about tree planting. At this time, I will give the floor to Kevin Lombard.
As you know, we're in the age of a very difficult year with COVID, and I would have really preferred to do this type of workshop in the garden with a group of people. I feel like these are the kinds of activities that are best shown in person, but this is the best we can do, and so I'm going to give it my best shot to do some live tree planting, and then so if you can put questions in the chat box, I'll try to join back into the laptop when the sun starts going down. But I figured at least I can speak real fast, and then we can talk about more of the fundamentals inside. I'm at my house right now, and I hope you can hear me, and I hope the internet connection isn't too bad, and I hope everyone else out there is staying safe also during this time. I'm gonna be working with my helper, who's my son, and he's right here, and he's gonna be helping to hold the camera for me. But what I'm gonna show you right now is these bare-rooted tree and shrunting methods. So this is what you might find in Home Depot or Lowe's right now. This is a bare-rooted red currant. I am not endorsing Lowe's or Home Depot. Sometimes you can find these types of these trees and shrubs in their nursery section. Although most times I recommend going to local nurseries because they will usually have things that are more appropriately adapted for this region. So there's basically this time of year we're doing a lot of bare root, and there's also these what were called container plantings. So this is what I'm referring to as a container, and they have both benefits and pros and cons. The pro of the container is it can be planted almost any time, but you have to take care of the root system carefully. The pros of the bare root is you have to plant it with an established root system, but you have to plant it this time of year, or in the fall is also a really good time to plant bare rooted trees as well. So I'm gonna hand this over to my son, and he's gonna bring in the camera close in. So if you could just kind of zoom in on this area right here, okay? So when you're looking at tree or shrub planting this time of year, you're gonna wanna dig your hole, and I'm using two types of shovels here. This is, you have that? Can you see that, Diego? Okay, this is another type of shovel that is also useful for digging holes. This is called a sharpshooter. I call this a sharpshooter. And then, so one thing that you always want to do when you're planting is you want to make sure your hole is about double the size of the root ball, and you want to make sure you go wide out. Dig a nice wide hole. The reason for this is because you have these compaction sometimes, and you want to make sure the roots have lots of fluffy soil to go back in behind the roots. So I like to dig wide holes and deep, and then instead of stuffing the roots into a really small hole, that's the worst thing you can do, because you end up constricting the roots, and you it's called J rooting. when you do that J rooting. If you stuff a bare rooted plant into a small hole, the roots are not going to grow out very well. So, and the thing I like about doing this kind of work is that you get a little bit of an exercise out of it, which is all the point of gardening. You're not just doing it for the planting of the tree, but you're also doing it for your health. You're getting a little bit of an aerobic workout and getting the blood flowing. You might also be thinking about other things besides what's going on in the world, which is a added bonus for all of us that need a psychological break from the current events that are going on. And that's what I really like about gardening. It's more than just gardening. It's a physical and mental well-being. So these are called red currants. They're a fruit. They're a fruit that's on a shrub. It'll get maybe 10 feet tall and wide max. And these came in these packages that are from the nursery. They're packed in sawdust, and that's just to try to keep the roots moist. If you order these from a nursery, you might actually get them in a box full of the trees or shrubs, and they're going to be packed in either shredded paper or sawdust, and they ship out this time of year. Bare root trees, fruit trees, especially in grapes, so they ship out in usually March. So that's what they call it, bare root. Can you get a good shot of that? So bare roots, it has no soil on it when it comes to you from the nursery. Sometimes you'll get a bare root that has roots that come way out, and you might have to do a little bit of root pruning, by root pruning, cutting off maybe some of the longer roots. These don't have a lot of problems with that, but I've seen bare root trees and shrubs that have massive root balls. You don't want to just go and stuff this into the ground, like I was saying. Okay, another important concept, if you can zoom in there, is this is where the tree or this shrub came out of the ground when it was taken from the nursery and removed and packaged for bare root transportation. This is a soil line from where it was in the nursery. You can tell because these are where the roots are right here. So you want to always plant your tree at the level of where it was taken out of the ground. So my level, if you can pull back a little bit, and you can see the level of the top of my ground here. I'm wanting to keep this at approximate that level. I may plant it a little bit low because it serves as a rain catchment. But I'm going to have to backfill a little bit here. Are you catching this, Diego? Okay, I got it. I'm going to backfill it a little bit. And sometimes you might have to put a little mound underneath to get that. So I'm just kind of taking my hand and making sure that I got this at that level. You got that all right, Diego? Okay. So can you look into the hole here, Diego, with the camera and see how I got the roots kind of spread out? These want these to be, constricted. You want to tease them out and get them in the different directions so they're going to grow. That's how they're going to grow out. All right, you got that? Okay, you can pull back a little bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and backfill, but you can see there's plenty of room now. This has been loosened up. I'm gonna go ahead and backfill it. And contrary to maybe what some might recommend, I don't usually add I don't add any fertilizer at the time of planting. I might add some compost. Uh, Compost is good, maybe about 20% compost. But the tree roots are going to be establishing in the soil that it's going to be growing in. So adding fertilizer at the time of planting is going to be problematic because fertilizer have salts and it might have a tendency to burn the roots. So you don't really need to throw a bunch of fertilizer in the soil in the beginning, or manure or whatever you're going to use for fertilizer. So I'm getting this in. I'm working the soil around. I'm getting it. I don't want to plant it deep. I want to make sure that I'm still at that level that it was taken out of the nursery and matching it to my ground. I hope you're all following this. And so there, I've got it just about where it should be. And then I'm going to take this remaining soil, if you can widen out, Diego, so you can capture this. This is all the sawdust that was in there. Throw a little organic matter in. I'm gonna make a little berm around it so that when I water it in, the water doesn't drain off the side. It kind of makes a catchment. So that is pretty much you might find if you buy one of these types of containers. These are fine, but the problem with these is that you get what's called, when you pull it out of the pot, the roots are constricted. And so then you get these encircling roots that grow around and around and around. This one's not too bad, but if we were to take this and plant it in the ground without doing anything to address this encircling, then the roots are just going to keep growing around and around and around. And I'll try to show a picture of that here a little bit later. So to address that problem when you're planting containerized plants, don't just pull it out of the pot and stick it in the ground. You need to address this. And what I like to do is I like to take a saw, and I usually have a saw that's specifically for doing this, and I like to break these roots up. I like to take it around, and you're not damaging the plant. You're cutting those encircling roots. You can tease them with your fingernails, get it all kind of nice and loose. Sometimes I'll come and cut the bottom of it off also to break that. So in extreme cases, this whole thing will be a mass of roots. But you really just kind of want to tease it out like that. And then that's what goes around. I'm obviously not going to plant this here tropical plant here. It'll die, it'll freeze tonight. But it's a good illustration of how to deal with these types of plants. So These are some good tools to have for planting too. If you have a pair of pruning shears, you can use those. You can use a pocket knife. A pocket knife works good. You might have these types of containers for different trees. You know, same thing. You're going to have to pull these out and tease the roots clean. So I guess, are there any questions before we're starting to get a little bit dark here? Are there any questions?
Yes, Kevin, you do have one question here. What is the latest time in spring and fall you are able to plant trees?
The latest in the spring is I've planted these in March, even up to April. But the bare root, they start it's like past middle of April, let's say. Then we start getting into those really hot weathers, and that's when you have to you need to water this. Like I would water this the way I would come in here is I would get my garden hose, and it's too cold, it's pretty frosty, but I'll come out here with a bucket of water and I'll fill this whole basin with water. I'll flood it, and that will actually settle the soil around the roots. You don't need to be like doing a bunch of patting down and packing it down with your hands. You fill this up with water and you let water compact around. And sometimes I'll stick the water hose into the soil and let the water bubble up and I'll do that around the whole day, be able to see the water going and moving the roots around the soil. And what I'm trying to get at is if you get into hot weather in late April and then you actually, you're going to stress that plant a lot. And so I wouldn't go past the middle of April. You want to do it while they're dormant and not leafed out. So they're going to be able to not have to photosynthesize. They were planted as bare roots, and this is a jujube tree right here. And I water them about once a week in the first year to get them started. And the best way to do it is just to stick your finger into the ground, and if it feels moist, then you're good. If it starts to feel dry, then you need to water. If you can take soil and ball it up like this, you can see how it's holding together. There's plenty of moisture in the soil right now, but you still need to get it saturated at the time of planting so the soil will get pressed in with the roots and come in contact. But this is another way of telling like how wet your soil is. And so this will fall apart if it's dry, if that helps. I wanted to point out real fast while we're out here, this is a grafted tree. And I don't know if you can see that on your screen there, but the graft union is right here. And so you always want to plant the graft union above the soil. You don't want to bury this graft union. That's another important thing to keep in mind, because if you bury this graft union, then it's going to sucker up from the bottom. This, what they call the root stock, is right here. And then what they call this is the scion. This is the top part. This is what the fruit's going to be on. The root stock is giving it some extra strength and vigor. The scion is giving it the fruit that you want to grow. But if you bury this below the graft union, you're going to have problems. So always, if you get grafted material, make sure that you plant that graft union about 2 inches above the soil. You see, I don't know if you can see that on your screen. So that's a real important concept too. Are there
Okay,
any other?
we have another question. What are the best trees to plant for shade?
So good shade trees are, oh, let's see, I got pretty much anything that'll grow will be good for shade. Apricots are really good. You know, we don't get a whole lot of apricots sometimes here where I live because the flowers frost out on us. But like here's an apricot tree right here that grew up from a seed, and it grows up pretty fast. And so I'm a big fan of the apricots. I have this this other tree here, which is called a robinia. It's a New Mexico locust. It's okay it's a fast growing shade tree, but it suckers a lot. So I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it because if you plant it in your garden, you're going to have suckers everywhere. But if you plant it outwards a little bit, it might be okay. Let's see. Fruit trees, like here's a cherry, for instance. This is a pie cherry, a sour cherry, and it's already about 15 feet high. And so I planted all these to provide shade to the front of the east side of the house. And like here's a crab apple. Crab apples are really tough. I don't get any fruit off of it, but it does provide some level of shade. Mulberries, they're okay. I think the mulberries, if you get the fruiting kind, you're gonna get the fruit dropping all over your car and your house. So you want to make sure but mulberries are delicious, and they're great for semi-arid environments. But if you do plant a fruiting mulberry, make sure that you plant it away from your house or your cars, because the birds will poop it everywhere. And they do have non-fruiting mulberries. So that's another pretty decent shade tree. All my shade trees are mulberries and apricots.
Okay, we have 2 more questions. When should you prune a tree?
Okay, so that's a really good question. It's pruning season time. You should be pruning trees now if you have fruit trees. So I don't know if my internet's going to survive out here this far. I'll give it a shot. But let's see. Here is a example of an apple tree. And so it should be pruned now. And this is where it was pruned last year, right where my finger is, right there. I don't know if you can see that. And
Yeah.
and so they grow out about 2 feet, a foot to 2 feet every year. If you don't prune it back, you're going to have a pretty big tree or crazy tree. So now's the time to prune, and we're going to have a video on that Brandon's going to be posting to YouTube soon once we get our that all edited. But now's a good time to prune fruit trees. We should be pruning our apples. We should be pruning our peaches and our plums and our cherries. Otherwise, you can prune any time really, but you don't want to prune too late. The fall, you want to give the plant enough time to go into a winter sleep, dormancy. So you don't want to prune late in the season. And then you don't want to prune after apples, have, for instance, have started flowering. Once they start flowering, that's when you should probably stop pruning.
Okay, the last question is, how far apart do you plant trees?
So that's a really good question too. I might try to go to my laptop to illustrate some of this, but the tree spacing is going to be dependent on the overall size. And so when you get a tree at a nursery, it's going to be this really tiny plant, but you have to look up and research what that tree is at maturity, and that's going to dictate how far spacing you should plant. So if a tree gets 20 feet wide, you don't want to plant it close to your house, because you might have a tree, 20 years from now that's really tall, and then it becomes a risk management problem, a liability. So always when you're looking at trees at the nursery, do your little bit of research and try to find out what that tree or shrub is going to be full size at maturity, and then let that be the judge of how far wide your spacing is. There's no general rule of thumb. Fruit trees are on dwarfing rootstock sometimes, or standard rootstock. So it's all gonna be dependent on that aspect as well. Okay, so this is the other thing I wanted to point out, is these trees have these root systems, right? They're extend way out beyond the plant, right? So I don't know if you can see that or not. And there's what is called their drip line on these. So you got to keep in mind that where your tree roots are going to grow at maturity, they're going to grow out further out than what we think of normally. Trees, and we usually think of trees as having these roots that are really, they go down, and they go way down deep, but actually in reality, tree roots are very shallow. So these are going to dictate how you plan your tree planting. You see where I see this a lot, where it's nice and shady under a full grown tree. You want to park your car there in the summer. This is just something that you want to keep in mind, that tree roots will get damaged this way. Tree roots often get cut when there's excavation for utilities or whatever. And this is another consideration when you're planting your tree, like making sure you plan ahead a little bit. I see this a lot in the urban setting, where a tree is planted in a concrete sidewalk for shade. These are Bradford pears. They're very tough plants, but they can become invasive. And so they're not generally recommended for New Mexico. I talked about planting and why it's important to make the hole wide and big, because you get these areas of compaction, and then when you water, the water just pools, and basically these trees are gone now because they suffocated from overwatering, and they basically drown when they're like this. So do you have enough space for the tree to grow? Are the roots going to get constricted? These might pertain to the urban setting, but they also pertain to anywhere, really, because we have very hard soils here, sometimes sandstone. Those issues can be dealt with if you dig your hole wide enough and deep enough. and then you backfill with good loose soil. But I wanted to show you this picture. Can you all see this root ball right here where my cursor is?
Yes.
So this guy, this friend of mine, he's like, why is my tree growing so poorly? And I told him, well, pull it out of the ground and let's take a look at the roots. And this is what we found. Like the root system was not broken apart. It was just, and it just sat there and it never grew out of it, and it basically died. So you got to break these roots up. These are from container trees, and so you got to break those roots up. Otherwise, you're going to have this situation. And if I'm ever looking at a tree that's in decline, I'll usually ask these kinds of questions for diagnostic purposes. That's pretty much, I just wanted to mention some other reasons why we should plant trees, though. And agroforestry is an important component of tree planting, and is something that it involves mixing trees on the farm and the farmland. And so if you have a fence line, these are great places to plant, or if you need a windbreak. And these systems actually qualify for conservation credits if you're applying for NRCS grants, like EQIP for your farm. If you do intercropping, you can get extra conservation credits for that. These are just shots from the Midwest. This is black walnut, but you can see this farm field here, and then this tree planting. It's very organized. And this gentleman planted the trees for timber production for black walnut. Sometimes you see trees planted. This is a hog operation, and this is in Minnesota, but it still pertains here. You get these mixed plantings of these agroforestry settings for odor control, but it also serves as a screen, and it's also riparian buffer strips. And we have a big problem with the riparian buffer strips, or lack thereof, along the San Juan and Animas rivers. Sometimes we get a lot of nutrients that wash into the river. And so these are some strategies that might be used for farmers to try to intercept those nutrients before they go into the river. At the Science Center, we've been doing work with this hybrid poplar. This is not a tree that I would recommend for around your house, but it's just something that might be considered for like a windbreak, a fast-growing windbreak. We're going to have a final report coming out on this project very soon. But that's pretty much all I have for the talk, and I'm happy to try to answer any additional questions that I can. And I really appreciate the opportunities to do these kinds of presentations. Yeah, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, we do have a question. Give me a second. What age of a tree is best when buying trees from containers?
So the nice thing about the containers for large trees, pretty much any age, you can buy them as young as 2-3 years old, up to like some of these massive containerized trees that landscape companies will plant. They could be up to 10 or 15-year-olds in big giant containers. So it's really just how much you want to spend is what it boils down to. So yeah, it's just about how much you want to spend. You can buy trees that are massive, massive old trees and containers, but I like to start small. I find that the small trees that you can get from the state forestry are just as good as anything else. They establish well, and they typically do catch up to some of the larger trees that you buy at nurseries. You might spend $100 or more for some of these, and you can buy a dollar tree from the state forestry, and that tree might actually catch up to the more expensive tree after 10 years.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kevin. And then we have another question. After planting 1-year-old apricot trees from containers, how fast do they grow a year?
That's a good question. So like my apricots, they actually grew from seeds. They were kind of feral, where maybe a bird dropped them. And that one I showed you earlier, that one's probably about 5 years old. It grows that fast. If you give it good water and nutrients, either from a fertilizer or compost or properly aged manure, you can push them a little bit harder. Water quality factors in. You want to test your water, make sure you don't, if you're using well water, you might want to check it for salts. Most of the time, the ditch water around here is really good. It doesn't have any salts in it. You don't have to worry about it too much. The NTUA water is fine to get trees growing as well. I use municipal water when I have to. Sometimes I'll use municipal water in the winter. If it's a really dry winter, I will like to try to give my trees a little bit of water if it's especially dry, because the roots are always going to be active. So that's another consideration, is you don't want to let the roots dry out over the winter, even though the tree might not have leaves on it.
Okay, great. And then another question, would it be recommended to wet the ground first and then transplanting into the ground from container, or what ground prep should be done?
That's a good question. Sometimes I'll wet the ground, especially if the ground is really hard to begin with. I'll dig my hole and I'll get to kind of a hard sandstone type of layer. I'll throw a couple of 5-gallon buckets of water in there, let the water soak in, and then I can dig deeper and easier. I typically don't water or wet the soil at the time of planting too much, because if you're dealing with mud, it makes it a little bit messier and harder to deal with. So, but I do water thoroughly right after planting, and I mean just saturating it, filling up that ring basin that I think I tried to illustrate when we planted that one tree, that one shrub, making sure that basin is completely full of water and then letting it drain down, filling it up again, and then letting it drain down, especially after you first plant it, just get it really super saturated.
Okay, great. And another question is, where can I get ball root fruit trees? Farmington Nursery does not carry any.
Would that be balled and burlapped or bare root?
Let me see. Nanaba, do you want to answer that question? Okay, in the meantime, while Nanaba is typing up her question there, I want to invite you guys to tomorrow's drought management webinar series. The Navajo Nation is going to be providing the precipitation variability throughout the Navajo Nation and the drought severity evaluation tool video. Okay, so I think Nanaba has sent her question. No, but we do have another question. What about watering, scheduling? How consistent should watering be until you back off for the tree to be a bit sustainable?
Okay, so I see that in the chat. I'll answer that first before I go to the watering. So can you get ball rooted? I think is or what they call ball and burlap is what I think maybe the question might be referring to. So there's actually another type of tree that you can buy at nurseries that's called balled and burlapped. And these are where the tree has been dug in the field and wrapped with a burlap bag, basically, and with the soil, and then you plant that. And so balled and burlap is something you can find up in Durango at the two nurseries up there. Again, I'm not endorsing any nurseries per se, but all of the local nurseries are going to be more expert at telling you what might grow better than Lowe's or Home Depot. So you might try up in Durango for balled and burlapped. These are typically bigger trees. Bare root fruit trees. Now, that might be what you're referring to, the bare root fruit trees. Those, so I was looking to find some pretty decent varieties that I thought would grow well in our area at Lowe's this morning. I was actually quite surprised, actually. So they did have a number of grapes and berries, and they had cherries and apricots and peaches that might do well here. I'm not endorsing them, but I was actually quite surprised because I like to teach with props, and so I'm always looking for these things before I do a lecture like this. And then I usually order them in from nurseries, though, from the Pacific Northwest for the bare root. So I ordered a bunch of apples, for instance, from a nursery called Rain Tree Nursery. I'm not endorsing them, but I found their stuff is pretty good, and there's a number of reputable nurseries out there. And now with the internet, with the reviews, be sure to check the reviews and see if anyone's putting bad reviews on. Those are red flags usually. So on the watering question, giving them water about once a week through the spring and the summer, filling that basin up, building a nice little basin of soil around the tree that you plant, and filling that all the way up for 1 week should last. But be sure to check it, stick your fingers in there and all the way down and fill that soil. And then, once a tree is established, I usually give them a good soaking once a month. Some of my more established trees around here, I'll throw a hose on them from the ditch. I'll soak them overnight for 24 hours. I'll move the hose to the next tree. And then I'll try to do that as long as I can until the water goes off out of the ditch. And fortunately, it was looking really bad with the winter drought. Fortunately, we got a little bit of snow, and I'm not worrying too much about it right now. So I think but you always want to keep in mind that tree roots are active during the winter, even though they don't have leaves on them, and the roots are still actively growing. So you want to never walk away during a dry winter. You want to try to give them a little drink if you can.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. If any of you guys have any more questions, just raise your hand and I'll unmute you. I'll give you a couple of seconds to do that.
I also sent Sadie, I sent you that handout, I think. So I sent a 2-page little handout, and if you wanted to send that out in an email or post it in the chat.
Yeah, for sure. Sadie is having some technical difficulties. This is Jessie. So we could email that out to everyone if they would like. We could do that for sure. But in the meantime, thank you, Kevin, for your presentation and providing the hands-on video.
It's my pleasure. I really want to have something, when we get these restrictions lifted, we'll do this, we can do this out at the Science Center and do it somewhere else,
Yeah.
You know, it'll be fun to try to get back together as a group.
There's another question from Joe. She says to please repeat the info on NRCS credit.
So if you're applying for an EQIP grant, these are supposed to help with getting infrastructure for your farm, for irrigation. Some of them are for hoop houses. It's RCS they'll come out to your farm and they'll conduct an evaluation. And if you have tree plantings, you get credit for that. You know, because it's a competitive process, you're competing against other applicants. So if you have, if you can plant more trees around your property, you're check boxing some of what they might be looking for in conservation. If that answers the question.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. If there are no further questions, this concludes our presentation for the evening. Thank you again, Kevin, and thank you everyone for joining us. And don't forget, tomorrow, you see on the screen, we'll be having our last drought management webinar series presentation brought to you by Navajo Nation Department of Water Resources. And then our contacts are on there. This video will be recorded, it's recording, and then posted on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. So everybody, if that's it, we'll go ahead and end the session here. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, and you all continue to stay safe.
For sure. You too, Kevin.
Okay, have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone, again. All right, bye-bye.
Goodbye.